Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at RSR annual conference. It's very honored to be here directly from Italy. This year, I can be there directly in South Africa. But I want to explain what happened here in Europe in the last years, try to give you some experience and some benchmarking about the development of the rail sector in this country. So first of all, I want to share with you my presentation that will speak exactly about the strengthening partnerships. We have a benchmarking experience from European country. So I will share with you this experience from Italy. And this experience, not only from Italy, but also from other countries, because Europe had started many years ago to create one single area for rail sector. So it's very, very important to see how it was possible. Just a short presentation of myself. I'm adjunct professor Andrea Giuricin. I'm CEO of Tra Consulting, but also I teach at CESIS at University Milano Bicocca. I'm also senior rail consultant for the World Bank, and at the same time, I'm consultant for United Nations. I teach in several countries. I was also a former visiting professor in China Academy of Railway Science. So I will try to give you a little bit the experience from the academic side and also directly from the railway side, thanks to my experience in different railway with different rail private operator in the high-speed rail and also in the freight rail. So first of all, I think it's very, very interesting to understand how is going the world in terms of rail industry. In Europe, let's start from Europe. What we saw that Europeans decide to open the market to the competition in the last years. Since 2020, finally, the country has to open the competition in the passenger sector. The rail freight sector was already open more than 10 years ago, so we have competition in the rail freight, and in the passenger, we start to see different competition. Italy was the first country that decided to anticipate the European reform. In 2012, we saw that we have the experience of high-speed rail competition with a private operator. Now the country, for example, in Middle East, there's a lot of rail investment, but they need some experience. They need to implement what happened in the other part of the world. If we go to China and other Asian countries, we can see that the Chinese operator need some market efficiency. They try to make some reform, but of course, when I work there also, the idea is how to make a reform to make more competitive the rail sector. South Korea is another example of liberalization, where we have a second operator that started the competition in the high-speed rail. That was very interesting because I helped, for example, to make a memorandum of understanding between the first high-speed rail private company in Italy and the first in South Korea. And they started at the end of 2016. Completely different business model is, for example, in Japan. You find private vertical integrated model where a company manages the infrastructure, also the railway undertaking, and also the land development. In Asia, what we saw, there's a big investment in the high speed, especially strong investment. Think about India or Indonesia that will have soon the first high speed rail. And in Africa, there's big opportunity, of course. There's a strong potentiality for the rail market, not only for the freight market, but also for the passenger market. I'm working in several countries, thanks also to the World Bank, and I can tell you that there's really a great potentiality in the market. And what is needed probably is more integration between the different countries of Africa, and I think that that we will see better in my presentation soon. At the end, we have for example, in US, we have private operator in the rail freight, but in the passenger side, we saw that the Amtrak is a state-owned enterprise that needs some development. And what we saw that President Biden decided to make big investment and also to liberalize the passenger sector. So what about rail industry? What we have to tell that there's many investment in the high-speed rail lines, more than 250 kilometers. In some cases, there's the second level of high speed that is considered more than 200 kilometers per hour. If we check the number from USC, we can see that in the last year, more than 15,000 kilometers was added. And right now, there's more than 52,000 kilometers at the beginning of last year. This year, we are more than 55,000. If we check how the business model is working, that is very interesting to understand because we have not one single model. Also for South Africa, it's completely different model than other countries. But if we can start to make all this sector all together, we can see that we have a vertical integration in many cases. Think about Japan or Hong Kong, where the railway infrastructure and the railway company are exactly the same group, are exactly the same company. We saw that, for example, the same in Tanzania. Then we have a different model, like a vertical separation, like Sweden, UK, or Spain, where, for example, what we saw is that that there's one company that is the infrastructure manager that is completely separate from the railway undertaking. That could be one, or you can have different railway undertaking. In the case of this country, you have competition, so you will see different railway undertaking using the same infrastructure. And then there's the holding structure that we will see better, like in Germany, Italy, my country, and Austria, where you have an holding country, company that is that is, of course, a holding that is a state-owned enterprise that's manage the infrastructure manager with a company, another company completely owned by the same holding structure that is a railway undertaking, other activities so, but they are separated company under the same structure, under the same holding. And this is the structure of Germany, Italy, Austria, and other countries. How it's working in Italy is very interesting. So what we saw that there's an incumbent that is FSI holding, that is an holding, Ferrovie dello Stato Italiane, that is completely controlled by the Minister of the Economy, 100% by the Minister of the Economy. From one side, you have RFI, that is the infrastructure manager, and the other side, you have Trenitalia, that is the railway undertaking. And then you have a private operator like Italo NTV, the company that I started working in 2009 with the CEO of the company there. And then you have also private rail freight undertaking. All these companies that are private use the same infrastructure. So they use the same infrastructure of FSI holding. That is, Italo NTV from a side, they're using the infrastructure, for example, for €8 per train kilometers, more or less, if we consider the energy cost. And there's fixed and access charge, of course, on that. And the same is for private rail freight. Of course, they pay less in the Italian case for using the infrastructure, but is the access charge is paying by the directly by the companies to the infrastructure manager. How to fix that is a big work. It's a really difficult work. I'm working all around the world about that. So just a quick view I will give you. But there's an independent authority for transport that fixes the economic regulation for the use of the infrastructure. And then we have the national safety body that manage all the safety aspects. That is external. There are two external body, or in this case as a body, in this case as an authority, that are two different, very important roles that are independent from the companies, are independent from the government. And in Spain, for example, we have something different because in Spain, as I told you, we have two different companies. So there's a separation between the railway undertaking that are state-owned enterprise, for example. Think about Renfe for viajeros, that is passenger or freight. And then you have the infrastructure manager that are divided for the traditional rail and the high-speed rail. Then, of course, in general, here in the railway undertaking, you have other private operators that are entering, especially in the freight first, and right now also in the high-speed rail. Also in this case, to use the infrastructure, there's an economic authority, that is the authority of regulation, that is named CNMC, that fix the price, fix the tariff for the track access charge. And then you have a national safety body that fix the rules and control the rules about the safety. So what is very interesting that the countries like Spain or like in Italy, they made a lot of investment, for example, high-speed line. You can see here many red lines that are already completed in Spain. And you can see there's also in Italy, there's already big line that will be expanding the next year. This is very, very important because many times there was investment from different national countries. So it's a different government that decide to go in this direction. But what is interesting that in reality, there's a strategy on that. There's an European strategy. And the European strategy is the TEN-T network. There's also a European Commission that put a budget to develop this kind of investment. There's also coordination with other countries that are outside from, for example, European Union. Think about Switzerland. And there are not only national rail investment, but there's also a budget at the top level from European level that help to develop this kind of network, this kind of international network. Of course, what we saw that also a single regulation, we are going for a single regulation with, with the European Union Agency for Railway, that I had the honor to give some speech also for them, that is really coordinating the whole national safety body. And more they have more power to try to have a single regulation also for the safety at the European level. So there's a strong development on that. And I think that is a good example, even if it's very complex with 27 different governments or 28 different governments, it's really complex to go in this direction, but it was already done. And the idea is not only think about the rail has to be the backbone for the transportation, and it's the backbone also with other transport modes. Intermodality is really a key of success, but the rail has to be the backbone. So, for example, you can have a port in a country like in Italy, think about Genoa or other city like Trieste, and then you have to have a real European backbone that connects to the, for example, the dry ports in another country. That could be, for example, in France, could be, for example, in Germany and so on. But you have to have a real European backbone. So what is very interesting that this strategy to create a network that connecting the main points for logistics, for example, and also for the passenger, connecting different countries. So the mentality has to be not just for a single country, but has to be really a little bit European in this case. And I think is the best way to create something like that. Very quick on the track access charge. For example, this is the track access charge in Italy. And what we saw that is an important cost. For example, between 13 and 22%, depending also of the level of track access charge, and also depending the total cost of the company. You have the incumbent that have a different structure of cost than the rail private freight operator and so on. But it's very interesting that to understand that is very important. And also, if we see in the high-speed rail, for example, in Italy, it's around 30% the total cost of access charge. In other countries, it could be also more than 50%. So just to make understandable to you that even if you have a structure that is a vertical, that you have a vertical separation, you have a holding, you have also an integrated, vertically integrated structure, like in Tanzania, for example. What we really saw, that it's possible to introduce a regulation for the use of the infrastructure for third parties. And this kind of access charge, a part of the cost or a part of the tariff has to cover the direct cost linked to the wear and tear of the infrastructure, and the other part is linked to the markup, and that is named markup, that is linked to the ability to pay of different operators. So this is very important. So you have to calculate, and sorry that I'm a little bit academic, but you have to calculate the total admissible cost for the infrastructure manager. You have to decide what is the level of state fund to help the development of railway sector. You can have also zero if you don't want to help the railway sector. And then you have to calculate, apart that, you have to calculate the efficient total cost. And the track access charge is divided between direct cost and markup. So you have three ways to help the railway company, the infrastructure manager. In the long term, for example, you can reduce as a state with subsidies directly the total admissible cost is around, can see here in the point 1. So you can reduce because the state makes some investment on the infrastructure that has not to be repaid totally by the infrastructure manager. The second way is to increase or decrease the state fund that could be given every year. In this case, you can have a multi-annual contract with the infrastructure manager, and you can reduce here, or you can increase here the intervention of the state. You can have also zero here. And the third one is to help in the short term, to help directly the reduction, to have the reduction of access charge directly helping, for example, the railway undertaking or PSO services and so on, if you want to reduce here. And this is the typical case that we saw in many countries with the reduction of or the elimination of markup part components, especially during the COVID-19 year. The other element that we have to take in consideration that is that to build the infrastructure, many times there's a lot of cost. Here you have an example from China. You know, China made a huge investment in the railway sector, but also there's a problem in terms of how to repay this kind of investment. And one of the solutions that they try to give to many governments is that you can have private investment that can arrive to increase the use of the network, to increase the number of the trains that are on the network that costs a lot. The network costs a lot of investment. In this case, for example, there's a private investment that was around $1 billion before starting. Italo NTV started the 28th of April 2012, and they have a break-even in 2015, but they make private investment to buy new trains and so on, to use the same network. They pay for using the network, of course, more than around €8 per train kilometers. And in this case, the cost, the investment was more than €1 billion for that. And what is very interesting, that at the beginning in Italy, there was a private bank, there was a big entrepreneur, there was the first insurance group that was the owner. And in 2018, the company was sold to an infrastructure fund that is named Global Infrastructure Partner from US. So right now, the railway company is owned by this structure, especially from GIP, that's from America, from US. And it's very interesting that was a big development of the company. As you can see, just the private operator, this is just the private operator using the same network of the state-owned enterprise. They have 20 million passengers for long distance, for the high-speed rail. That means that is similar to the aviation. Normally is more than 400 kilometers. And the EBITDA margin was higher than 35%. In reality, it was 40% in 2019, the last year. So it's very profitable. It's possible to increase the use of the network to have higher also traffic on the network, and at the same time, finally, you have also a profitable company. The same in the rail freight. More than 50% of the traffic right now in Italy are given by private rail freight or freight company that are not the state-owned company. It's more than 50%, and it's very interesting that it was growing a lot during the last years. And this is really the case, that you are better use of the network. The last is about high-speed rail. As I told to you, there was a strong increase of the demand, more than 100%. In reality, if you consider 2019, we have 120% more traffic with the same network, more or less, with the same GDP. So Italy was not growing, but with a lower price for the consumer. So it's very similar to what we saw in the aviation business. With that slide, I really want to thank you for the attention. And it's very a pleasure to be here to try to explain how Europe and how Italy was able to develop the railway sector. And I hope that this kind of economic regulation, safety regulation that we saw also at higher level, for example, at European level, could help also to give some idea for South Africa, that of course South Africa in general for Africa. So thank you very much. Really, thank you very much for the attention. And I'm here for any question, and you will find my contact thanks to RSR.